All right, so so we're at the very beginning of the project, and the what we're going to be focusing on is gathering requirements. Right, and in the previous lecture, we talked about the different types of requirements that there are. You know, the business, user, functional, non-functional, right? So there are many different strategies depending on the audience that you're going to be meeting with, on what works best. If you're going to be doing some brainstorming, are you going to be doing face-to-face meetings, or are you going to be sending out questionnaires? There's different strategies that you can use to gather the requirements, each one with its pros and cons. So we're going to be talking a little bit about some of them, not all of them. There's quite a few. So we're going to be looking at the more common requirements, elicitation strategies, and why would you use one or another. Also, we're going to be taking a little bit about talking a lot about the risks in these kinds of meetings. Oftentimes, folks are going to be talking about, if we don't do this, there's going to be a risk of that, and if we use a particular technology, then there's a risk of this happening or not. And so some of that, certainly you need to be cognizant of these risks. On how frequent do you think it's going to happen? Is it something that's going to happen just only once? Is it going to be at a continuing risk? And also, what are the chances that a risk actually happening? If it does happen, how bad could it be, right? What would be the impact? So certainly we need to consider risk factors, and we'll talk about that a little bit as well. So we're way at the beginning of the requirements gathering, at the very beginning of a project. Again, trying to agree amongst ourselves what it is that we're going to build, and what are the priorities. What is it that we're going to build first, right? So those are the two main questions that you need to answer. Right? What are we building, and how important is it to build one thing? If you break it up into different things that would need to be built, what do we do first? Right? Where do we start? Assuming that we have a limited amount of time and resources. So requirements elicitation, and the base idea is that we need to gather from the various stakeholders, or at least the folks that represent the stakeholders. We need to gather the requirements, and this is a very intensive human endeavor. Right? You have to interact with humans, asking them questions. So a lot of time and effort, maybe with folks that have very high salaries, that their time is very, very valuable, very, very expensive, and you have a limited time that you have to talk to them, right? And so your meetings are very expensive, right? So you have to make sure that they're as productive as possible. So lots and lots of collaborative interaction. And one of the hardest things is first to identify who the stakeholders are, right? Should I be talking to this person? Does this person actually have any say on how we should do it? And a lot of the questions, a lot of the interviews will end. Who else do you think I should be talking to, right? Because they might be questions of why is this person talking to me? They should be talking to X, right? So part of this you coming from the outside, not knowing particularly the structure of an organization. It would be very hard for you to identify if the person you're talking to is relevant. So certainly identifying the stakeholders is one of the challenges here. Knowing very well that as you interview these folks and they give you requirements, typically there'll be conflicting requirements. One person tells you one thing, the other person says the complete opposite of what this other person said. Even themselves they will be conflicting opinions. A lot of things they're not going to say, right? They're going to assume that you already understand their business, that you understand the domain knowledge, and oftentimes you don't know, right? Or you might have very general knowledge. So a lot of things that they might take it for granted and not even tell you, right? Because it's so obvious to them. A lot of the requirements depend on each other. That you can't build this until you build this other thing, right? So they have a natural sequence. That they have to be built in a particular order, or that are dependent either on some regulatory body or some law or some financial reason. So they're depending on each other, and you need to uncover what are the dependencies among the requirements. Some of them are very complex for any one person to understand, right? So that's the main reason why we even have a team, right? There's no one person can understand it, and people have bits and pieces of how they understand the overall requirement. Oftentimes, the folks that know the most are the most busy, right? They're traveling, they're meeting with dignitaries, they're meeting with lots of important folks, and they're just not available. So that might be a risk factor that you might need to include in your requirements, right? That if I have a requirement, will I have your participation of being able to validate and make sure that I am doing what you asked me to do. So the process, obviously, the first of eliciting the requirements. First of all, is identifying who the stakeholders are, or if they're going to have a proxy, right, that at least understands the domain as well as the other person who can speak on the behalf of one stakeholder or as a group of stakeholders, right? Oftentimes you'll be referred to as the product owner, right, or the project owner, right? That presumably is the subject matter expert, right, at that particular domain. And then depending on the stakeholders, you'll need different strategies, right? Of perhaps a little bit of brainstorming, a lot of some one-on-one, face-to-face conversation, some forms that we're gonna send out for you to fill out. So there'll be it's like 20 different strategies for eliciting the requirements, and depending on their availability, you'll have to decide what combination of strategies are you going to use to gather the requirements from these folks. And you're going to have to time box a little bit what the time effort is going to take, right? On how long do you think the whole effort of eliciting will this be, right? And also the resources that you'll need for gathering these resources. Maybe you'll need to will you have access to the meeting rooms? Will folks be able to fly in for a conference? Perhaps you'll need to hire out a conference room at a hotel, right, and have everybody else that is in London and in Raleigh and across the in the East Pacific. Will they be able to fly in and have these discussions and gather all their requirements? You'll have to organize all these meetings and all the resources, all the food, and everybody where they're going to stay. You'll be responsible for doing all these things, right? You're going to prepare the sessions and gather all the types of questions that everybody has, all the different risks all the concerns they might have, and come up with an agenda that you like to hit several points, right? Again, this is going to be a very, very expensive endeavor. People flying in from all over the world just to meet those 2, 3, 4 days for the whole week. So definitely you want to be as prepared and organized as possible. Then you conduct the session. Everybody flies back to their respective working lives, and then you need a strategy to verify. Continually go back to them and say, okay, this is what I heard from you. Is this really what you meant? And verify those requirements. So this is very, very expensive. This could be extremely expensive. So first you'll need to so the first part is identifying this part, right? First is identify the stakeholders. So that part you'll need to kind of create like a matrix of all the folks that are invested in the success of the project and try to capture what are their profiles, or what is your role, who do you report to, what are your responsibilities, what is your point of view, your expectations from this project, in your criteria, what would you consider for this project to be a success, right? And so definitely that's going to impinge on a lot of the requirements that they're going to be eliciting, some of the concerns, some of the constraints that they might be familiar with, if they're technically proficient. And also for that particular person, right? For that particular group of stakeholders, what are the strategies that you're going to if you're remote, right, and you're working always in the east, across the world, perhaps face-to-face communication is not easy to come by. So you create a matrix, right? So you know exactly who's responsible for what. If anybody has questions about a particular type of thing of the project, we know who to go and ask, and who is going to be depending on their responsibilities. And the stakeholders at some point, they will be considered the various actors in our use case. When we get to use case analyses, right? These stakeholders will be our actors. So the matrix, this organizational matrix, is one of the multiple documents that are going to make up what we're going to refer to later on as the requirements package. The requirements package is going to have use cases, the matrix, the functional requirements. Yes?
What does the actors mean here?
Anybody who interacts with the system.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, same thing as the use case, right? So certainly there will be stakeholders who are representing the business, but you have also stakeholders representing the actual end users who are using this, right?
Yeah.
And so everybody is participating, and depending on the audience, you'll have different elicitation strategies, right? And so you use certain elicitation strategies for the end user, different from what you would use from a VP or some business owner. So here's just a partial list of the techniques that can be used, and we're only going to touch on a few of them, but some of the more common ones. But certainly interviews by far is the most common one, right? Let's just talk. Right? Let's just meet and have a conversation, a one-to-one conversation. I mean, they can be very, very productive, but they're very dependent on the human the PR capabilities of the interviewer. You know, how outgoing and how open and how likable the interviewer is, right? So certainly it can be very, very successful, but they also can be very, very they can fail miserably. If the person is not as likable and easygoing. But certainly there are other ones, brainstorming and creating where you have a kind of like an unbounded, unstructured brainstorming where everybody gets to say everything and nobody can criticize any of your ideas, right? And you come to a consensus. You can use some other techniques in brainstorming where you can structure a little bit more, where you can have first a large group, and then you can have identify focus groups where you can brainstorm specific parts of the system. Certainly creating different prototypes where folks that might be very apt at building rapid prototypes, right? For folks to as people are meeting, they can create multiple prototypes that folks to actually visualize it in their minds, right? They can actually use it and try to break it and says, okay, well, yes, I think this is what I told you to do, but now that I see it, I don't like it, right? So it's a cheap way of quickly just eliminating dead ends, so that we shouldn't go that route, right? But not only until you see an actual prototype and you actually know these things. So anyway, so let's go over a couple of these. Again, the whole purpose of the elicitation is that we want to go from a very implicit, amorphous goal that business has or the users might have into something more formal, right? Something that we can. Everyone looks at it and agree and says, yes, this is what we're doing, right? So going from something very, very informal and qualitative to something that is more formal and quantitative, right? That we can measure. Can we measure these things, and can we, on the other end, can we say that we have succeeded, right? Or at any time in the process, can we measure ourselves on how far are we into going towards a progressing towards a conclusion? And again, just as a reminder that For the various types of stakeholders, we will have different types of requirements depending on the who the audience is, who you're talking to. You'll have different types of requirements. Just quickly, for instance, the functional requirements were requirements that were somewhat tangible. That you saw it at either there was a user interface, or there was a button, or field, or form, or some structure that you can actually touch and see, and that's implemented. Whereas non-functional is a little bit less tangible, but nevertheless is measurable. Right? You don't see it implemented anywhere that you can point at, but it just feels quick, snappy. It feels that it performs quickly, right? I go there, it doesn't crash on me, right? That it works very well just for 10 people or for 10,000 folks, simultaneously hitting the website. Right? So again, it's measurable, right? But it's nothing that you can point at, and that it's implemented. So let's take a look at first at this first technique or strategy. Brainstorming is a requirements elicitation strategy, where we have somewhat very informal, open-ended discussions where everybody can shout, right, and say what they will, and nobody should be allowed to criticize, right, that particular idea. The thing is that it can get rowdy, pretty quickly. So you need fairly good folks that can manage these kinds of these meetings. You need to have a facilitator that moderates, right? Make sure that people are not talking over each other. Either they have a microphone that they can pass around, and make sure that only the person who has the mic can speak, and also can organize all these very open-ended ideas, organize it into something that they're moving forward. There's quite a bit of kind of graphical techniques that allow to brainstorm. One of them is the Ishikawa diagramming tool that you kind of have a particular problem, and then you try to elicit what are the different aspects that impact or create a particular issue. Either it could be a problem, but it could also be something positive, right? Positive or negative, and then you try to create kind of like what backbones, right? You create a particular issue, whether it's positive or negative, right? And you try to categorize what are the categories of things that are the main causes for this particular issue, whether it's positive or negative. And there might be each category might actually have multiple aspects to it, but you try to generalize and say, oh, it's the way we do things, right? It's the policies, and you might list multiple policies and multiple processes, and different folks that have impact on that, right? And you generalize those categories to try to identify what are they, where do these pain points come from. So this would be a pain point, right? Or something's positive as well, right? And you try to identify and classify those issues. Again, there's tons of these graphical tools that allow you to capture these things and organize all these random thoughts. Now the matrix that we mentioned earlier that is going to contain all the stakeholders, all these elicitation requirements that you're working through. You're going to be collating all these pieces of information. It might be multiple documents where you're documenting this. And the idea is that at the end of this effort, right, you're going to come up with a requirements package. So this is going to be one of your deliverables for the project, right? For the project due at the end of the semester, right? In your presentation, as part of your presentation, and one of the things that you're going to submit on Blackboard is a requirements package, right? Where you're going to have the stakeholder matrices. You're going to have the user requirements, the functional and non-functional requirements, the project scope, business rules, and so on and so forth, right? Some prototype interface mock-ups. Okay, and it will be part of your presentation at the end of the semester. Okay? So this is what I'm going to be one of your deliverables. So we are as we're going through these brainstorming and all these strategies, we are building this document. This is what we're building, right? Trying to elicit all those requirements. We're not there yet. Right? We're not there at the user requirements yet. We're way much before that, right? We're trying to just how is it that we're going to gather all the information? Now these documents follow a particular structure. Some of them are very open-ended. Usually organizations will have started from a standard structure of the documents, right? And they probably will have morphed that document to their particular uses. They've done many projects, right? And they might have added or removed certain aspects of the document that works for them. But a standard is the IEEE 830 that kind of gives you some guidelines on how your requirements document should be organized. So here's an example of what you might find in such a document. And again, the one you're going to be submitting, again, should follow this structure. The introduction, kind of the overarching project charter. What is it that we're trying to accomplish in an abstract set of sentences, paragraphs that capture kind of like a executive summary, right? That if I read this one paragraph, I should be able to get an idea what is it about. That I don't need to read the rest, right? As an executive, some glossary of definitions and terms. The matrix not listed here. Probably somewhere up here would be listed there. You would have the objectives and goals, the business requirements, user requirements, functional requirements, and then the scope, conclusions, and references. So this is a preliminary suggestion on how to organize the requirements package document. Okay. Again, different organizations might have adapted to their own needs. Once you have this, now obviously many of these requirements will be left unspecified, right? Understanding that we just don't know enough today to make any decisions. That some of them perhaps might have been prototyped, right? Enough to understand what the risks are, right? And those would have been captured in a risk assessment that we'll talk a little later. So enough to understand what the complexity, if it's even feasible, right? So you might have gone through some prototyping just to be able to gather some of this. Some of them might have been just left unspecified, right? We know enough that we can do it, but we don't know the details, and that will be tackled when indeed we're going to start implementing it, right? As part of several sprints, we're going to select some of these requirements, and there we're going to specify some of the more specifics and fill in the blanks. We understand that not everything can be known a priori, right? And those kinds of risks would be assessed in the risk assessment matrix that we'll talk a little later, right? So this just should give us some confidence that we are going to be making progress as we go further. Once we have come up with these requirements, we do accept that it's a living document, right? That there will be modifications, but there will be an accepted process for modifying this document. Right? We know what the original was, or what the original baseline requirements were, and some of the estimates and priorities at that particular time, and with the understanding that they will be modified. There's no point on working much more on some of these requirements because we know they might change, right? And we're all open-minded that this will change. We have a process in place every week. If somebody raises their hand and says that things might change, there will be process. Will be the requirements change will be submitted to a committee. The committee will look at the changes, right? And some of them will be accepted. Some of them will be rejected, depending on the priorities and depending on whether they can be validated. And it will be baselined again, right? And decide that okay, well the delivery phase has either pushed ahead, right? Or we might have come to the conclusion that we can negotiate and take out some other requirement and put this new requirement in place. Some negotiation, and the committee comes to that conclusion, and again, everybody is kept informed of the change, right? Everyone else, yes.
Yeah, but we as the we provide the service, right? Can we really like reject the change modified by our guest?
Oh no, the committee is obviously with the client. The client participates, right? We're only facilitating. We're only facilitators, right? We're only helping them discover what they really need, right? And then we facilitate the process, right? But they are the ultimate deciders of whether we are doing it this way or not.
Okay.
Right? We're only there to challenge them. It says, do you really want to do this first before that? Right? And if they want to do that, then
so we're
we'll
to the baseline.
yes, and we'll point out the risk factors that they had identified, right? And what the repercussions will be. But obviously the ultimate deciders are them. Yes. So just some general guidelines that as folks are shouting their opinions and what requirements, some guidelines of measuring whether what they're saying are of any value. Is it specific enough? Can we even measure it? Can we measure whether we are achieving your requirement or not? Is it even feasible in the schedule, in the amount of money that we have, the folks that we are employing? Is it even relevant, right? Is it not relevant to this particular discussion? And can a developer can they write a piece of code that actually evaluates that requirement has been achieved, right? So if it can be calculated, then perhaps it's not a good requirement. Yes.
If they use that same acronym for like goal-oriented stuff, like when you make goals.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, I think I've heard that
it's a guideline for everything, right?
Yeah.
You can measure. There's a whole bunch of acronyms like SOLID or SMART and what is another one? ACID. There's a whole bunch of them out there. So brainstorming. I think these slides should be a different organization. Typically, brainstorming. Once you've had these very unstructured discussion, they're typically followed up by interviews, right? Where we can have more one-on-one, right? Or also observations where we can either follow you around and make some, or look at the forms you're looking at that you're using, and just observe like a fly on the wall, just looking at what you're doing. So typically these very unstructured sessions are typically followed by much more structured ones, right? But typically we don't know what the structure should be until we have the brainstorm, right? So it's kind of chaos, right? And we're trying to tend towards some organization, some order. We're trying to make some order out of that first chaos, right? So observation is yet another elicitation strategy. Where again we're just gonna be listening in or just viewing how folks interact with the current system, and we're gonna be shadowing them and just following them around. Sometimes it's very awkward, depending on who they are, right? If it's especially if it's a worker or a line worker, oftentimes they'll feel they won't perform exactly how they would normally perform. They probably might perform better than they normally perform, right? Or they might feel that their job is at stake, or somehow that we're threatening their livelihood somehow, right? So it's very hard to kind of be there but not be there, right? And we have to allay their fears and make them understand that we're just trying to improve their particular performance in the system. As they interact with it. So oftentimes it could, depending on your sampling size, it could be biased. If you're always doing in the morning, or you're always doing in the afternoon, or it's always the same set of people that you're following, you could get some biased sampling. So ideally, you want to try and have some random intervals, right? That sometimes in the morning, sometimes in the afternoon, sometimes different days in the week, where you follow folks around. And it is, we're just there to just learn about the process and us become, some kind of experts that we can then make some educated suggestions. And so we're there to participate and just observe. It's a fairly inexpensive technique. We're there just filling out forms. We can easily tabulate our data later, right, and see some trends, see some statistics, some statistical analysis. Once you see something that somebody explained it to you and seemed to be fairly complex, once you see it done manually and somebody filling out this form says, "Oh, now I know what you mean. Okay, now I see what the issue is." Right? It's fairly good at capturing some reliable data. Again, some of the challenges is that folks might behave differently when they're observed, right? And your results can be skewed. The observation could be interrupted, and some tasks might be themselves random, right? That you might have to make a lot of decisions, right? And depending on those decisions, today you had to do it one way, but tomorrow maybe you'll do it some other way, right? So some tasks might not be as sequential and predictable. Making sure that we're both available at a particular time that we could do the observation, or what we are observing is actually not representative of the normal ways of doing things, right? Because we're looking at it in the wrong way. Another technique is surveys. So this is a very cheap way of blasting a form for folks to fill out, right? Maybe a Google form, right, and that can easily be tabulated, and you can send it out to hundreds of folks, right? And then you can get back some results. It automatically tabulates it, makes a table for you, a spreadsheet that you can then do all sorts of analysis and graphs and whatnot. Now the surveys they're not very easy to come up. I'm not sure what is exactly what you're going to be asking. Right, so they're fairly complex to come up that are you even asking the right questions, right? Some folks like to make these free-form, open-ended questions where folks are intended to answer in a natural language prose, or ideally you would do something like you have fill in the blanks or multiple choice or scales from 1 to 5. Those are much easier to tabulate, right, and aggregate and sum or average or graph, as opposed to free formats questions. They might give you much more information, but then somebody has to parse it, right? Actually, need to make sense out of the answer and tabulate it somehow and represent it in some other way. So it gives you more information, but it's harder to tabulate, right, and extract quantitative data. So qualitative versus quantitative, right? Again, it's fairly inexpensive. You can just blast a form out to folks. They don't have to be locally co-located, right? They can answer it at their own convenience, right? It's a very good for asynchronous communication, right? Folks can answer anonymously, so we don't have to know who you are. So you can be candid about what you're going to be answering. It can be tabulated quickly, but it's very common that folks never get to it, right? You're not there, right? So you're not pressuring to do anything. So they feel that they can just skip it or not answer at all, so the return rates tend to be low. Folks just they don't have time, or they might leave quite a bit of the questions unanswered. Halfway through the questionnaire, they just close the browser and they don't complete it. If there might be some questions that they didn't answer, there's no way to be there and respond to them. Maybe the question was poorly phrased, right? And they tend to be very impersonal, right? So there's no way to look at them in the face and see if they're smirking or if they're making some body language that might give you some clues on something that you weren't asking for, right? And yes, you don't really know what is it that you're going to ask, right? Ideally, it's from having brainstormed, that you've gone through the brainstorm and you've identified some of the causes, right, of pain, and from there is that you would have derived your questionnaire. So some of these examples of some structured questionnaires, you might have a range of answers, from 1 to 5, or strongly agree all the way to strongly disagree, with yes/no questions, or multiple choice, or rankings. Those are easier to tabulate. Yes.
Going back one slide.
Yeah.
For the disadvantages, why would body language be necessarily important?
Right. So it might be that if they will be in front of you, depending on the way you ask the questions, they might make a face of they're smirking, or they're being ironic, or they're being that would maybe, if you were there, you would do a follow-up question. It says, why do you think that's funny, or what do you think that's they might have a history, and they might feel that have how do you say a negative view of the entire process, right? Because they were always in waterfall, and all of a sudden we're doing agile. They might say, why are we even doing this? They might even believe in the entire process, right? So you would read that from their body language. They're being aggressive, or they're being passive, right? And then you would the questionnaire would adapt. And follow up those questions with a different set of questions than others, right? And that's why interviews tend to be the more common ones, right? That can adapt on the fly, depending on how the interview is going. So yeah, you lose that it's very impersonal, right? But they're very cheap. Whereas interviews are very, very expensive to run, right? So interviews are by far the more common techniques for eliciting, but they're very dependent on the skill of the interviewer, right? Of catching these body language, right? The way they're behaving. Whether they might feel skeptical of the whole thing, or they might feel threatened, right, by this process, right, and you be there physically, personal, right, to alleviate some of these issues. Right. So the idea is, again, in an interview, you want to find facts. You want to. Or this might be a follow-up interview, right? Where we had first met, we had a questionnaire, right? And you answer this, and pretty much everybody was in the same ballpark, but you are way out here, right? You're an outlier, and perhaps I'd like to meet with you to understand this very specific, interesting point of view, and so we'll come back and clarify. Maybe the questionnaire was not effective. Maybe you know what to answer, wasn't clear. So let's try and verify and clarify. Also, it's interpersonal. People generally feel that things are actually happening when you come to see them, and they see something folks actually meeting. Oftentimes, meetings are not as productive as we think they are. But nevertheless, we are social animals, and we do see value in getting together, especially if there's food around, and you usually see it's the easiest way to come to consensus is to actually feed the people that are going to come into the meetings, right? Especially if it's the same culture, it's a very cultural thing to come to consensus. We're still tribal. Right, so it's a great way to get the stakeholders involved and excited about the whole process. Again, identify requirements and solicit opinions, things that there were no ways to capture it in any specific question. They could be unstructured, right? Let's just meet over lunch or let's go out to dinner, and it could be a very social discussion, right? Or it could be fairly structured, right? Where I come with a very set of questions, right? Very specific set of questions that I want answered. Again, they could be open-ended or closed-ended. And obviously, advantages. We get to interact, get people excited about this. And it's a very social aspect of the requirements gathering. We can get more feedback, more some explanations on what something we didn't understand. We can adapt. The analyst can adapt or reward the question based on the body language that they get from the individual. Although they're extremely expensive, right? It's very time-consuming. It could not be practical to fly out folks from overseas and have them meet face-to-face. The folks might not be available. Heavily dependent on the analyst's skills. It could be just impractical to do. Some examples that like a script. Ideally, you would go prepared, or maybe you know the script by heart. Certainly salespeople and folks that are dealing with people all day in, all day in, all day out, right? They know this script by heart, right? They've done this and they're prepared. This is a very hard. You need a very special skill to do this. Salespeople tend to have very personal skills. Usually, the first 2, 3, 4 interviews are not as productive, but as they get into the groove, right? They get into the productivity increases. As they get more practice, they get more fluid and more personal with their interviewee. Typically, the script might go as the first couple of minutes are just introductions and what the goals are here that we want to achieve, and then you might have a couple of very specific questions on whether a certain aspect of the process, if you think it's important or not important, why is it important? Describe a couple things here and there. And the very last one typically is, okay, who else should I be speaking to, right? From your point of view, who else might be interested in this kinds of discussion? So that would broaden the list of stakeholders who might have a different point of view from what you've just gathered. But it shouldn't be more than 15, 20 minutes, right? Typically after that, folks tend to to shut off, right, and not engage as enthusiastically once you hit the 30-minute mark. It's very, very hard to have anything longer than that and still be effective. Certainly, as an interviewee, as the interviewer, right? Certainly, you need to be prepared going there and be cordial and make the person feel comfortable. That you're not being aggressive or are you trying to lead the person in a particular way or any biases that you might have, right? That or any personal views that you might have, right? You're there to listen to their points of view, right? And try to jot down as objectively as possible, right? Because you might have gone through this many times, yes, and you might have your own take on what is it that they're doing, and you might have your own frustrations that they're not doing something that should be done, or they're doing something that they shouldn't be doing, right? And so you might have your own leeway, but it's their decisions. You can give your point of view and how things should be done, but once they make decisions, you're there to collect information before you suggest, right? So don't inject any of your own opinions. Don't make convoluted questions or use any jargon that the person might not be familiar with. Careful about being either specifically to that person or the group of that of this group of stakeholders that person belongs to. Right? So make sure you understand that either it's their point of view, it is an opinion, is it a fact? Try to understand it. Yes.
Can you explain me what loaded question and the leading questions means?
Something that you're expecting a particular response to, right? So you know that it's going to be a controversial question that you've heard, right? And you want to elicit a particular response, right? So as opposed to you would take a very objective question and have them tell you what they think, as opposed to asking it in a way that would elicit them to respond in a particular aggressive way. Okay.
So just try not to
Don't be a provocateur.
Yeah,
don't provoke the person, knowing that you know they're going to be mad at that particular question.
Do not affect their thought. Right?
Yeah.
So try to let them to.
Right. That they would give them their point of view, but it comes from them, right, okay. Internally. Yes. So this is a dress appropriately. Okay, so this is a fairly typically you'll be meeting these folks, and you want to be as professional as possible, and people and hand you the authority that you know what you're talking about, right? That you are assertive and you're not intimidated, or you're not intimidating anybody, right? That you get close to them when you're going to talk to them, right? And just move across, right? And not focus on any one person, right? And you're courteous, you're listening. You're the one who is in control of the interview, of whether we go one way or another. A challenge courteously, right? Be patient, and you're there to listen. Don't talk more than listen. Again, you obviously you're going to have biases, right? But don't be there to promote your own biases. Don't use jargon. Don't make any assumptions unless they tell you explicitly. Recordings, folks tend to be to not feel comfortable being recorded, right? So certainly jot down everything you want, and even perhaps a laptop would not be a good idea. People feel that there's kind of a barrier of communication, right? So maybe it's something that you can jot down on a piece of paper. So again, to make it as the other person at ease, and you're there to listen to them, and that you're not listening, obviously, a laptop or anything that you're not paying attention to them, even though obviously you are. Certainly listen, check for their nonverbal, their body language, their posture, and their facial expressions, the eye contact. Always make eye contact with the person, just to make sure that they feel that they're being listened to. Another technique that's fairly important is building something as quickly as possible for the user to take a look at and evaluate, what they've been saying. Right? It says, okay, we want to build this, that, and the other, and so a good way to communicate is, well, let's try see what that looks like, right? And perhaps in your team you might have some folks who are very well versed at some rapid prototyping tool, right, where they can just drag and drop a whole bunch of widgets on a page, right, and then turn around and show, is this what you mean, right? Would this work, right? And quickly the user can say, yeah, well, maybe 3 pages instead of just one. Maybe one is too overloaded. And just turn around and give it to them for eliciting the requirements or validating what they're saying, right? It's a very good tool for experimenting, right, and taking a look at looking at various alternatives. Right? So you might provide multiple alternatives and say, okay, well, let's navigate through the application this way. Well, you had to click 4 different buttons to get there. How about this one? It says, ooh, I only had to click only twice to get to the same piece of information. And have them look at it and see it early on. Depending on your team, it could be very inexpensive, right? Of putting things together real quick, and also to explore the feasibility of actually building. But again, it could, depending on your team, it could be very time consuming and actually building these things, and always make sure not to fall in the trap that a prototype might eventually actually become the product. Right? Prototyping is only used for either measuring a risk, eliciting requirements, or checking the feasibility of something. Right? Oftentimes, developers are caught in the trap that they started working on a prototype, and then they incrementally add to the prototype without usually when they were building the prototype, they did a lot of shortcuts, right? Many things that they wouldn't have done if they would be following good practices, right? And that usually the attitude is that, oh, I'll come back later and fix it later, and usually they don't, right? So these prototypes can be also misleading for the business owner, and look at this as, oh, you're done. Why do I need to do? Why is it going to take months? Why is it going to take years? You're done. You're showing me something that is sort of working, right? How much harder can it be, right, to actually have a product, right? So it could be very unrealistic or give false expectations to the manager, right? The upper who don't have idea of how hard is it to actually develop software, right? So you got to be careful. And manage those kinds of expectations. So anyway, so so these sessions of interviews and brainstorming, you need to organize these things. So typically they could be fairly expensive undertakings, or they could take a whole week, right? Maybe a couple of days or a whole week, depending on the size of the team. Where folks, you have some folks working in North Carolina, some folks in Europe, some folks all over the place that you need to fly them in, and you're gonna rent out a room or large space in some hotel. Everybody has to fly in for a couple of days, and you need to be organized, right? That what is that you're gonna be talking, an agenda. There's gonna be a facilitator that's gonna keep everybody on track. Obviously, all the food is gonna go around. There's gonna be a lot of breaks. Breakout sessions for different aspects of the application that's going to be implemented. So then you need to organize all these things, right? You need to bring all the subject matter experts, folks that are going to be writing all these things, the IT staff for creating prototypes, all the different managers, folks that are representing the users, right? The system analysts, the product owners. They're all going to come here. Some VPs, some CEOs are going to actually maybe do come in at the beginning of the forum, right, at the beginning of the week, and then leave, and then come back maybe at the end to close, perhaps, right? So you need to organize all these things. So it's a fair amount of complexity there. You need to select a location, and people have to. They're going to need to stop working. The whole company or the whole team is going to be unavailable for a couple of days, and several rooms and all the projectors and computers, and so it's a fairly big undertaking, and you're going to be your firm as going to be responsible for it, right? Selecting who's going to go there, and you're going to have a prepared agenda and going to try to stick to that agenda. And folks, perhaps in advance, you're going to send it to them to kind of know what they're going to be expecting. It might be several rooms where they're going to be either focus rooms like this, where you might have just a few observers, scribes, prototypes, modeling, IT specialists, and all the users and domain experts meeting there and either brainstorming and then going out to different breakout sessions and then coming back and brainstorming some more. And some folks that are listening, they might be prototyping this, right? They might be prototyping as they listen to everybody make all these arguments, all these discussions, and then project it real quick. Is this what you mean, right? And have everybody vote on whether yes, that looks good or not. Right? And this might go for several days, right? So it's fairly expensive. Again, so stick to the yes.
So when we do our project and are eliciting requirements,
yeah.
Since we can't actually do these things,
it'll be just us four, right? Three of you and one of me, and I will be the the user, right? And have several of these chairs, and one of you might be the PM, and the who will come with the questions, and will run the meeting, right? And maybe you'll send to me a questionnaire the day before or a couple days earlier, right?
So
That I would
do it.
fill out, right?
Okay.
Right. Well, no, you decide, right? You decide on what elicitation
Yeah.
strategies you think is valid. Obviously, we're all going to use. I'm sure you're all going to send forms for me to fill out. And then, as a follow-up, right? 2 or 3 days later, when we meet, we would then have these run these meetings, for more brainstorming, for more questions that you might have.
Oh yeah, no, I just want to ask how about the interview? Can we interview you?
Sure, of course. Yeah. It's me. It's me. Yes. Yes.
Are you actually going to change seats in the meeting to designate different sessions?
I will change my voice. How's that? I'll talk like Michelle or Jeffrey. Right. So there's going to be an agenda, right? You're going to follow it and make sure that the scribes can take the notes, that you have the folks that are doing the prototypes are also be able to work on their stations. Get folks in what the ground rules are, that we're not going to be rowdy, that we're going to be respectful for everybody else, that we're not going to talk over each other. And you're going to be running these types of meetings, right? And encourage everybody to participate, not to be passive, right? It's very expensive to have them there. Please participate and provide a valuable input to the team. You'll probably go through a list of the existing forms, the existing user interfaces that we're currently using. Some folks are going to be brainstorming and saying what they like about it, what they don't like it, and it's going to be, and scribes are going to be writing all these things. Perhaps we're going to have video of actual users using the system, maybe some teachers using some content management system or some fulfillment folks, actually fulfilling and filling out the boxes, some actual video that represents some of the pain points, right, or some of the things that we might want to fix, or why, one of those reasons why either something is positive or negative. And again, so throughout the week, you might have folks fill out different questionnaires from the different stakeholders. Maybe conduct one-on-one interviews, or maybe identify who should I talk to, and then follow up these sessions with interviews later on. If you can, ideally you would create the prototypes right there and then, for folks to take a look at it and to do some verifications. Okay, so we also need to capture the business rule that we mentioned earlier. That there's going to be a document that captures all the high-level business rules about how we participate in our community, how we participate legally, how we participate with our the folks that we are providers, right? Or perhaps certain hours that we are open and closed, or some rules on how certain things cost, or if we give some folks some discounts because of they've reached a particular threshold and whatnot. So all these rules need to be captured in a business document, in a business rules document, and some of them might need to have either a flow diagram by which you come up to some kind of decision, or some decision table that if this happens, then this should happen, if this happens, then this should happen, or some ranges, if some values between some ranges, then this should happen, or some kind of pseudo algorithm that folks can follow and implement a particular business rule. You would document all those things. Here's an example. The premium life insurance policy is calculated based on a base price plus some surcharge depending on whether they're smokers, poor medical history, or the age of 75 or above. Right? So that could be a business rule, right, on how we calculate, right? So this is presumably this would be some predicate right? That is based on 3 or 4 different variables, depending on their ranges, gives you true, false, or some value that we calculate. So we would render them in a document with all the business rules. We also want to document the risks. Folks will tell you, why are we using Angular? Nobody knows how to use Angular. Why are we using NoSQL? I know it's the latest and greatest, but nobody knows MongoDB here. That's going to be a risk, right? So lots of folks are going to be pointing out many of these risks, right? Of if we don't do this, that's that's going to happen. So it's important that we do indeed document what everybody says, that how the sky is falling, and what is actual, right? So to try and see what's a perceived risk, versus an actual risk, right? So, and we have to challenge them. And risks have 2 aspects to them on whether, how probable is it that is what you're saying is actually going to happen, right? Is it definitely going to happen? Is it maybe? What is it? How do you feel that? And then once we know the likelihood, or what our subjective feeling of the likelihood, if it does happen, right, what is its impact? Does it have a very strong impact? Is it going to affect our project strongly, or very mildly, right? And so we can now calculate a risk score, right? Which would be the multiplication of those two. So those 2 fractions will give us a risk score. For the risk probability, we have to come up with a language that everybody agrees on, right? That what we mean by very unlikely all the way to very likely, right? Very unlikely, and then decide and agree on a scale what we mean by very unlikely or very likely, right? So very likely is a 90% chance that this will happen, or very unlikely it's only a 10% chance that this will actually happen, right? And then we have an abstract representation and a vocabulary when we talk about a particular risk. Yes. So once we have a scale of the risk probability, we might then do the same thing for the impact. Right? For the impact, also, what do we mean? What kind of impact does it have? Is it low impact? Is it a very high impact? And what do we mean by that? We give scores to them as well. Very low impact, it will have only a 5% impact on the overall project, or it's going to have an 80% impact on the overall project, right? And then we can then give all sorts of examples on different categories of what that would mean, right? On a category, whether it's cost, time, scope, quality, right? Will it impact a 5% cost? Will it increase a 5%? Will it increase an 80%, right? Or are we going to add a 5% time to the overall project, or is it going to add an 80%, right? How is it going to be impacted on each one of these? Scope, and whether it's going to be scope creep or quality, and give examples on each one of the categories. What does it mean, right? The quality is going to be degraded barely, even noticeable, or it's going to be just a completely the project will be useless completely, right? And so give examples of what we mean by this impact in different categories. So once we've agreed, right? Once we've agreed on the vocabulary of what do we mean by impact and what we mean by a risk factor, then we can start looking at a particular aspect or a particular risk factor that you give us, and then we can say, well, what is the likelihood of that happening, and what's the impact? Depending on that score, we might decide, well, how are we going to deal with that risk? Are we going to do everything we can to even avoid the risk, right? Or are we willing to accept that risk, right? And if it does happen, what are we going to do to mitigate it, right? So there's several strategies that we can take to deal with a risk, right? Either are we going to make every effort that this will never happen, right? Or are we okay with actually happening, right? And we'll accept the risk, and when it comes, I'll just deal with it, right? And anything in between. It could be that I could transfer the risk, so that it's not me the risk. I could transfer that to the vendor, perhaps. Or I can transfer it to my provider, right? So that yes, it can happen, but it's not me going to be impacted. It's going to be you, right? So I can transfer that risk to someone else, or mitigate, right? And say, okay, well, I'm going to accept that it will happen, right? And if it does happen, I'll deal with when it happens, or accept it says, okay, well, It's okay that the system crashes every so often. That's a big deal. It doesn't matter. It might not matter to me, right? That if it's once a month, it goes down. It's not a big deal, right? And I might decide that as a part of the business, right? And that's my attitude. So it would be any of these four. Right? How is it going to deal with the system going down? No way, or if it does happen, it's going to be somebody else's fault, and they're going to have to pay for it, and I'm going to be compensated. Or I'm going to have to mitigate it and call everybody, I'm sorry, blah blah blah, or compensate them in some way, or just not care. So for any yes.
Does anyone ever really say like it's okay if the system goes down every now and again? Like I mean, it might not be like mission critical.
Yeah, exactly. If it's not mission critical, right? So it depends, right? It depends. What is it, right? That your impact is so low, that if every once in a while something happens, right? Then it doesn't really matter. Or it could be that it happens at night, right? The system goes down, and it's very unlikely that somebody will be logging in after hours and the weekends, right? And we're doing maintenance, and obviously it's risky. And that perhaps one or two individuals will try to log in at Sunday night at 3 in the morning, right? But hey, if it does happen, I might deal with them, giving them an email, saying I'm sorry, blah blah, and that's enough for me.
So it's like the difference between like a major retailer's like transaction system going
Right.
down.
If I'm Amazon, I am not going to avoid it, right? I'm definitely not going to avoid it. I'm worldwide, right? I have to coexist in every time zone in the world, and so that's definitely not acceptable to me, right? Right. So for every risk factor, we would keep track of those risk factor in documented in a set of tables of documents and say what is the likelihood that's going to happen, the impact that we think is the score that goes along with it, and whether we're going to mitigate it, right? So for instance, if nobody knows how to do use case analysis, or nobody knows MySQL, or nobody knows Node.js, or whatever, right? Whatever, we each one of these will have a score, right? And then what are we going to do about it, right? And some of them will say, okay, well, no one knows how to do use cases. Well, we're going to mitigate it, right? We're going to say, okay, everybody's going to go and train. We're going to hire some folks. We're going to come in and train the entire team to do that, right? And whatever cost that goes along with it, and who's responsible for actually implementing that, right? And again, we would have a list of these things over them. So nobody knows developer, MySQL, or stakeholders that are not willing to be interviewed. So there's no way for us to go back and verify or validate our requirements. So that's very risky. Right? So you give me all these requirements, and then you're not going to be available for us to come back and say, if we have questions later on, right, and want to measure whether our progress is correct. If you're not going to be available, that's going to be very risky to the project. So definitely we want to document all these things. And that's it.